Welcome back to the Hive Doctor, your beekeeping mentor. It's my job to take the guesswork out of beekeeping for you. Today we're going to be talking about 3 ways that you can judge the strength of your hives without having to remove the hive cover. So stick around. So there's a lot of different ways that you can judge the strength of a beehive without having to open it up. And today we're going to cover 3 of those. This is something that you can use today. Go out into your bee yard and judge the strength immediately, knowing what I'm about to share with you now. The first way is the activity at the hive entrance. And of course, with all these methods, you're going to need more than one hive so that you can compare. Because when you can compare, you'll know that one is obviously more, one is obviously less. So let's go ahead and look at some hive entrances and start comparing and judging their strengths. Right here is a real easy one. I've got these 2 hives right next to each other on a 4-way stand, and although they are different bottom boards, this one's a traditional bottom board. It's got a deeper entrance. It's one of my old styles that I'm phasing out of. This is one of my newer bottom boards. And eventually I'll be drilling a hole right there in the center. Haven't got around to that yet, but I do have a hole right where you see all these bees grouping around, coming and going from. So clearly there's more activity going on the hive on the right than there is with bees coming and going on the left. Now, we do have bees coming and going from both, which is a good sign, but the activity level is markedly different. The one on the right's got more activity, one on the left, not so much. So here are the other 2 hives on the same hive stand. And again, it's easy to compare these 2. The hive on the left has got actually 2 drilled entrances, one on the left and one on the right of my box handle. The one on the right only has 1. But in my opinion, these 2 have about the same amount of activity coming and going. So just from this comparison, I'm going to judge them to be of very close but equal strength. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind when you're using this method of judging the strength of a hive is that you need to do it during a certain time of day. When it's warm, the sun is hitting the face of the hives, they're awake, and they're all very busy foraging, coming and going, bringing home nectar and pollen. In the morning when it's cool, there's not going to be much activity. And in the evening, you might see everyone coming home. Another thing that might make this difficult to judge is going to be if robbing is going on. You've got to be able to know that they're not actually robbing at the time, because robbing a hive out is going to give you a misjudgment of activity. The second way to judge the strength of a beehive is during a time when you're feeding your bees. Now here we're in the back of my hives, and on my special custom bottom boards, I have rear entrance feeders. They're not actually an entrance for the bees to come and go from, but that's just what I call it. Now, right here we have on the right, this jar is clearly empty. The one on the left has this much syrup left. So automatically, this is like a literal level, a literal gauge that you can use. The hive on the left is not quite as populated or as strong as the hive on the right. They've clearly got the numbers inside to be able to have taken that syrup already all the way down. Now, the only key to making sure that you get an accurate level when you're judging the strength of a hive this way is if you've fed the bees these comparison hives at the same time, which I did. Now, when you're judging the strength of your hives based on the method I just showed you with how much feed is left in the bottle compared to the hive next to it and the ones in the rest of your yard, there's something you need to keep in mind. If you find that the majority of your bees have emptied their bottles or have nearly emptied them, but 1 or 2 of your hives may still have like almost all of their feed still in their bottle, there's 2 possibilities. One is likely that that's just a really weak hive. They don't have the resources, in other words, the bees, to be able to go in and take that feed and store it. So that is a special circumstance where you need to get into the hive and do an inspection and find out what's going on. Likely is that they don't have a queen, or they have a very poor laying queen and they're on their way downhill fast. Another possibility is that the sugar syrup in that jar not all of the sugar dissolved, and so it may have settled down at the bottom, which is actually the top of the jar where the feeder lid is, and that undissolved sugar is blocking the bees from being able to suck the syrup through the holes. If that's the case, you need to take it out, turn it up, take that lid off, check the underside of the lid. If you see settled sugar on that, rinse it out. Scrape it up with your fingers, whatever it takes to give the bees access to that syrup. Put the lid back on, invert it, put it back into the hive so that they can get that feed into them. All right, so let's now move on to the third way to judge the strength of a beehive. And after that, I'm going to give you one more thing just as a bonus in this video. So far, if you're liking what you see, drop me one of these, tell your friends about the Hive Doctor. All right, let's get on to the third way. So the third way of comparing beehives and judging their strength is a little more invasive than the first two, but not as invasive as removing the hive cover. So in my case, I'm gonna work from the back of the hive, and because I feed from the back, I need to remove my feeders. You want to use very minimal smoke, just enough to let the bees know you're there, but not enough to make them start to move up and away from the bottom bars. And you'll see why here in a second. All right, just a little bit of smoke. I'm gonna pop the boxes because they're gonna be glued to the bottom boards with propolis. All right, that's loose. That one's loose. Now what I can do is lift the hive, kind of pivot it up, leave the front of it on the bottom board as I turn this up. Now you see, I've got bees on all these frames. This is why you don't want to smoke them too much, because these bees would move up and you would have a poor gauge as to the strength of the hive. Now you see this cluster? This tells me, now they're on 6 to 8 frames. This is a good cluster of bees. This tells me their strength, but I need something to go by. So I'm going to compare this to the one next door that had feed still. So I expect that they'll probably be slightly smaller than these girls. So now I'm just going to put this back down, line it up, and I'll give them their feed bottle back here in a second. Now we're going to pivot this one up, and I can already tell that this is lighter than the other hive, which is something we're going to talk about here in a second. Now on this one, there's only bees on 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 frames. So the cluster in this hive is much smaller than the one in this one. And this is one way that commercial beekeepers go around very quickly to gauge the strength of hives that they have before they send them out for pollination in various parts of the states. So I'm going to put that back down. And now we have a clear comparison. So there's two things to take away from that last comparison, where we upturned the boxes and checked out the cluster, the population of bees underneath, as just a real quick check. One is, obviously, how many bees there are. And because we compared them, it leads to the second thing. We know what our hives have the potential to look like during the time of year that we do these kind of checks. Right now, we're just coming into fall. So I know what the hive on the left, the weaker one, could potentially and should hopefully look like, because the one on the right is doing so much better. So I would use that as a comparison when I go through the yard, and I will probably find a lot of them of equal strength and possibly a couple that are even stronger with even more bees. Now the bonus I told you I'd give you at the beginning of the video, there's one more thing that you can do, but it's not to necessarily judge the strength of a hive because it can be misleading. And that's to walk behind the hive and just pick up the bottom board to feel the weight of that hive. Now that's not a good judge of strength or population, because that hive could have died from mites and left 40 or 50 pounds of honey, and you lift it up and you think, oh, they're heavy, that must be good, but secretly they're dead, which you should notice by zero activity happening at the hive entrance. But it could trick you if that hive is in the process of being robbed and you don't recognize robbing. Then you think, oh, there's bees just coming and going, they must be alive. So that's why that method is not a good way to judge the strength of a hive. But it could also tell you how much feed they have if it is a healthy hive and how much more they need. If they're really light and it's in fall, you know you need to start feeding because they didn't make enough honey during the season to go into fall with. There are several other methods of judging the strength of a hive, but this is just 3 that I hope help you out and teach you a little bit more in your beekeeping journey. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. And again, don't forget to drop me one of these. Thanks for tuning into the Hive Doctor, and I'll see you in the next video.